Hello and a warm welcome to another edition of The Debate, coming away from Press TV headquarters in Tehran with me, Behruz Najafi. A new page is being turned in the Irish politics. After years of domination by two centrist parties, now a left-wing nationalist party is taking the helm of affairs in Ireland. Sinn Fein has so far won nearly 25% of the first preference votes. It's announced willingness to form a coalition with left-leaning parties after winning the general election. What's in store for Ireland? In what way will trade talks between the UK and the EU impact it? We'll discuss those and more questions with our panelists. Before that, let's get an update from Press TV's Amina Tira in London about reactions to Sinn Féin's performance. Amina, over to you.
Well, it's perhaps been the most political earthquake since 1998 Good Friday Agreement, Behruz, because as you remember, Sinn Fein, the Republican movement, have long been a voice of power and a voice of some influence in the north of the country, in Northern Ireland. But in the south, they have failed thus far, before these elections, to really make an impact. And under the leadership of the woman they're referring to now as Storm Mary Lou MacDonald, Sinn Féin have proven that it's not just Fine Gael and Fianna Fail who are really at the heart of defining what Irish politics, especially that in the south, is about. You mentioned there that they're already on nearly 25% of first preferences from these last elections. And maybe one of the things that come out here as something as a worry, Leo Varadkar, who is the current Taoiseach, he's spoken of his the incompatibility between his party's politics and that of Sinn Féin. Well, I'm afraid, Mr. Varadkar, it seems that they've really cottoned on to addressing not just political issues to do with reunification and independence, but latching on to the very heart of what it means to be an Irish person, dealing with homelessness and so on. And this will have long, far-ranging implications for Irish politics going forward, Behruz.
All right. Thank you for that. Amina Taylor, our correspondent in London. Now, let me bring in former Sinn Féin publicity director Daniel Morrison from Belfast. Good to have you with us, Daniel. For a long time, you know, the two major parties swapped power between themselves. Now, this is called by many a seismic election shift. What has caused the Irish to opt for Sinn Féin this time?
Well, just to go back to something that your previous analyst said there about this being a seismic from 1998 and the signing of a Good Friday Agreement, I would actually argue that it goes back to 1918, 100 years ago, when Sinn Féin stood in the only All-Ireland election before the British government valiantly partitioned our country, and Sinn Féin won 75% of the seats at that stage. Of course, many of the Sinn Féin elected representatives, MPs, were imprisoned by England at that stage. So this is truly historic in that, given that all that Sinn Féin, the Republican Party, has gone through in terms of its leaders assassinated, members imprisoned, victims of censorship and repression, and yet out of this, Sinn Féin is the leading party, the most popular party in the south of Ireland, that is the Republic of Ireland. But if you also add to that the vote of Sinn Féin in the north of Ireland, then Sinn Féin is the largest political party in Ireland, which is extraordinary. It's an anti-imperialist party, totally opposed to colonisation, and stands for, of course, international solidarity with other struggling people. The issues upon which Sinn Féin were elected in this election very much come out of the international economic situation, where previous governments in Dublin introduced austerity measures which punished the poor and the less well off. And in the south of Ireland, we have a homeless crisis like no other. During the election, there was photographs shown of a child sitting on the street eating a thrown away pizza. There was a photograph of an old woman poking through bins to feed herself. The government has introduced all sorts of austerity measures basically to please their supporters, the big bankers and big business. And so what you have now is the people eventually now coming up and placing their trust in Sinn Fein.
Okay, now let me bring another panelist in. From Bristol, we'll have Tony Gosling, who is an investigative journalist, joining us. Good to have you with us, Tony. Sinn Féin's success is attributed to a rejection of the status quo and a desire for real change, and Daniel mentioned some part of the status quo. So what is the change that the Irish people want, and what does Sinn Féin's election victory mean for Ireland?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that this is a rejection of Leo Varadkar, the Fianna Fail leader in Ireland now. I mean, for many, many years, they've had a similar situation as in Britain with the Conservative and Labour parties, the United States with the Democrat and Republican parties. In Ireland, it's been Fianna Fail, Fine Gael, 22% Fine Gael this time, 21% Fine Gael this time. But the incredible thing about Sinn Féin is that they've got the top number of first preferences. So under the old system, that is to say the British system of first past the post, they would have almost certainly have already formed a government now. But there's going to be a long wait for a government, because nobody from the main establishment parties wants to form a coalition with Sinn Féin. This would amount to a revolution, an earthquake in Irish politics, with a party that's been for so many years on the outside of politics, suddenly part of the government. They don't want that. They'd much rather do a deal with their so-called opposite numbers. Well, what this really proves is that their opposite numbers, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, are really just two wings of the same party. And for decades, Ireland has been a one-party state under these two wings. So it's great to see that they've broken through Sinn Féin. And really, this is the most important take-home for me from this is the Irish people are beginning to get the confidence, particularly since they've got a proportional representation system in Ireland. They can do this. We can't in England, to just reject this two-party political system that they've been coping with, because everybody now knows in Ireland that they're not really representing the ordinary voters. They're representing the interests of big business. And I think if Leo Varadkar had, during the Brexit debacle, shown a little bit more, shall we say, equanimity, looking at both sides of the discussion and understanding that the majority of the British people did vote for Brexit, he instead decided to run a campaign against it. This is not going to impress ordinary Irish voters who are Democrats. Let's face it, they fought the British rule. In fact, they were probably the first major colony of Britain to overturn the British Empire. They did this very, very effectively in the late 1800s. And so they value governments that represent their people. And they've decided that they've had enough of this ping pong between the two main parties. They want a government that's going to really do stuff for them. And the other thing is the long time it's going to take to form a government, almost certainly. A coalition between these two main parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, finally admitting that they're really just one party, and then they'll start governing together. This is a conspiracy against the voters. And again, this is not going to impress the Irish voters come the next general election in Ireland.
Now, Daniel, let's consider Brexit now. You know, Brexit has been a product of a nationalist sentiment, and this sentiment has given rise to nationalist movements across the UK, including in Scotland, for example, and we're witnessing their push for independence. Now, what do you think could be the impact of Brexit on the Irish vote? Well,
of course, even though Brexit represented one of the biggest threats to our peace process, in terms of if Britain included the north of Ireland in its total withdrawal from the European Union, it would have been forced to set up a hard border, the border which we actually have dissolved as a result of the peace process, so that you're around the old border regions, all roads and all bridges are open without any checkpoints whatsoever. The military presence has completely gone. Brexit threatened this. Now, along with Sinn Féin's Martina Anderson, who was a great ambassador, she was one of the MEPs, members of the European Parliament for the north of Ireland herself, a former IRA prisoner who served 15 years in jail in England. She lobbied hard, as did Sinn Féin internationally, along with the Irish government, it has to be said, And the Irish government, along with the European Union, played to me, a hard game with the British and forced the British to exclude the north of Ireland from all of the terms of its withdrawal agreement, so that the north of Ireland and the south of Ireland remains almost the one economic area. There's going to be no border checkpoints, no checks on trade, no tariffs on trade between the north and the south. And for that reason, a lot of people, in my opinion, also incorrectly assumed that the Brexit issue had been put to bed. And that's why it featured way, way down the scale of issues in the election in comparison to homelessness and in comparison to health and education. It was way down the line. But it hasn't been resolved yet because the British government has yet to negotiate the trade agreement with the European Union. And they have to do that before the end of December of this year. Of course, the British government, under Boris Johnson, thought that he would quite quickly walk into a trade deal with Donald Trump. But that's run into some difficulties because, of course, there was a public outcry in Britain when there were leaks suggesting that Boris Johnson was prepared to sell off one of the proudest things in British society is a national health service, free national health service, and that was going to be privatised. And that was one of the conditions that Donald Trump was actually insisting upon if there was a trade deal, an automatic trade deal between Britain and the US. Furthermore, the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, only a few days ago, expressed annoyance that Britain was going to use the Chinese company Huawei for the new outlay of 5G mobile telephone network in Britain. So Britain hasn't just got its own way in terms of automatically leaving the European Union and adopting a trade deal with America. So that's still to be played out, and that still represents dangers for us in Ireland.
Now, Tony, Sinn Féin's President Mary-Lou McDonald is exploring options to see if it is possible to form a government without Fine Gael or Fianna Fail, which you say are two wings of the same party. Now, what are her chances to do that, or maybe is there going to be another election?
I would suggest we're going to see a Fianna Gael coalition. I mean, that seems to me to be the most likely outcome here, because we've got these two essentially internationalist parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, who see themselves at least as wedded to Brussels as they are to Dublin, and they don't want to have I mean, Sinn Fein is actually quite an internationalist grouping as well, but they are much more wanting to perpetuate the status quo in the interests of big business than they are actually wanting to do what the people want. But I'd just like to say something about the Irish border issue, which, with the backstop in Brexit, was massively important. You know, we need to just look back and remember what was the border like when we had a hard border before the Troubles started in 1972. We did have a border then, but it was a light border and there were no Troubles. So I think there's a certain amount of bullying and threatening going on here, saying, oh, well, Northern Ireland is not going to be allowed to have a real hard border. That may simply have to happen. And if the terrorists want to threaten violence, if it does happen, then that simply means that they are doing a direct threat to British sovereignty. I don't actually think that it's a good thing to have a separate state in Northern Ireland, but I think it should be up to the Northern Irish people to decide that. Now we have a separate country. They shouldn't just try and dissolve it without actually asking people, the Unionists and the Republicans in Northern Ireland, to actually take a vote on it. And of course, if there is any more trouble, then that's what will have to happen. There will have to be some sort of vote in the North to say, are we going to now start to join with the South and make a united Ireland? I mean, the forces that have been there for hundreds of years representing the British have caused an awful lot of trouble, and it would be quite nice to see them out of the way with a united Ireland. That would be, I think, a great outcome of all of this, particularly with the Democratic Unionist Party, the Orange Order, which is a secret society, which is very powerful in Northern Ireland politics. They are very close to the Freemasons in the UK. They try and do deals behind the scenes and really try and pull the wool over the eyes of the public and run Northern Ireland in their own interest. So I think with a vote, and I think that's what's we're going to see coming down the line, the Northern Irish may well vote to unite with Ireland, particularly if Britain is suffering under Brexit with all sorts of difficulties economically.
Interesting. Now, Daniel, before the vote, both Fine Gael and Fianna Fail ruled out getting into a coalition with Sinn Fein. Now, do you think would they put their feet down, or would they change their mind?
Well, we have a phenomena known as campaign rhetoric, where people say a lot of things during an election prior to the actual
It could change after.
the actually stance that they adopt subsequently. And certainly within this past 24 hours, Fianna Fail have been sending out mixed messages. The leader of Fianna Fail actually is the problem. Micheál Martin, he was the one who was most vociferous, even against members of his own backbenchers who were saying, don't be emphasising this. We might need to go into government with Sinn Fein after the election. But he was the one who made it a red line. Although in a radio interview and in a television interview earlier today, he was backpedaling a little, and he was saying things like, oh, let's see what way the figures pan out, let's see the results. So if Fianna Fail and Fine Gael combined together, they still wouldn't have enough numbers to form a stable coalition government. It's either going to take Sinn Fein, and its preference is that if it could unite all of the independents and the small left-wing and progressive parties to support a programme of government, if they manage to get 80 to support them, and Sinn Féin sitting on 37 at the moment, and I think Fianna Fail, although there's still votes to be counted, and constituencies haven't completed the actual distribution of votes. So Fianna Fail could end up being a little bit in front of Sinn Féin, but Sinn Féin haven't had the largest of the popular vote. Sinn Féin is in the driving seat here. So it could go on for some time, and also it might have to be resolved through a second general election. And in a second general election, Sinn Féin will not make the mistake that it's just made by not putting forward enough candidates and not contesting certain constituencies. Because if it had contested those extra constituencies, its actual vote of 25% of the popular vote, regardless of whether or not it would get people elected in those constituencies, would have been higher.
Now to Bristol, Tony, you know that Sinn Féin was strongly against Brexit. So what does its surge mean for the London-Brussels talks over the divorce deal?
Okay, well, first of all, that is going to be secondary, I think. Mary Lou MacDonald, the Sinn Féin leader, is the kingmaker right now in the Irish Republic. And she's going to be very much engaged in knowing what Irish politics is like. This is just on the track record of Irish politics. There will be a tremendous amount of horse trading and juggling, and this is likely to be a protracted process before a government is formed. And then when it is formed, what you'll find is quite a lot, I think, of backstabbing going on. So I don't think this is her main priority, Mary Lou MacDonald, but yes, it's going to make some sort of an impact. Let's not forget, though, that the previous leader in the Irish Republic, Leo Varadkar, has made things extremely difficult as he possibly can for Boris Johnson, being opposed to him politically and in being opposed to Brexit. So the Irish have actually, weighed in as Remain voters, if you want, in the British Brexit referendum campaign and all the fallout after that. So I don't think things are going to be any worse than they are under Leo Varadkar for the British with regard to Brexit. But Sinn Féin is a highly motivated, very young, highly intelligent party, and I think you've got a lot of young firebrand intellectuals who will do a fantastic job actually now in surfing this amazing wave of support that they've got, which really is a way of taking advantage of the general disillusionment in Ireland with their whole political process with the two main parties. People are just fed up with it right across the country, and they are looking to Sinn Féin saying, come on, Show us a better way. It can't be that difficult. You're a young party. We've given you the chance now to show us the way.
All right. Now, Danielle, in 2016, most of the people in Northern Ireland voted to remain in the EU. Now, what do you think are the chances that the same voters support leaving the UK and a united Ireland?
Well, interestingly enough, you can understand why a lot of the unionists who are pro-British in the north of Ireland would resist the idea that the IRA, so to speak, had bombed them into United Ireland. But it's much easier for them to square in their minds that they would choose to have a union of Ireland for their own economic reasons. And that is that the majority in the north, as you just said, voted by 56% to remain in the European Union. So regardless of what Johnny was saying there, I have no loyalty to Britain, and I didn't interfere in their politics. They interfere in ours, and that we are being dragged out of the European Union, which has provided some protections for us. I am highly critical of many aspects of the European Union, but it has provided some protection for us, and it's important in terms of our peace process. So a lot of unionists would, in my opinion, on economic grounds, be prepared to examine and look at a union of Ireland within the European Union. And of course, the European Union have said that if Ireland so decides if the north of Ireland so decides to rejoin the European Union, they will facilitate that. Now, of course, the big problem that the British have is that Scotland, and by people who is elected in the Scottish National Party, Scotland also wants to remain in the European Union.
Okay.
It has been taken out against its will, and they are threatening, if they are not given another independence referendum, there's a chance that they would unilaterally, almost like the Catalonians, call independence.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. I'm sorry, I have to jump in. We're out of time. Let me thank our guests. We had former Sinn Fein publicity director Daniel Morrison from Belfast and investigative journalist Tony Gosling joined us from Bristol with his comments. Thank you for watching this program. We'll see you next time.